These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. In 1920, engineers in the United States tested an early bulletproof vest by having a volunteer stand still while they fired pistols at his chest from just a few steps away. The staged trial was photographed to prove the vest could stop live rounds. This photo from 1911 shows the frost-damaged hand of British Antarctic expedition doctor Edward Atkinson after months in the polar cold. Such rare images were used to study how extreme cold changes the human body. In 1955, this hospital team prepares a man for electroconvulsive therapy, a brain treatment once used very often for hard-to-treat mood problems. The belts, wires, and calm faces show how normal this dramatic procedure had become in mid-century medicine. This 1930 photo shows a beekeeper taking part in bee bearding, a stunt where live bees form a thick living beard on the face and chest. The queen bee is usually kept in a small cage under the chin so that thousands of worker bees gather around her and cover the person. In 1988, astronauts and divers train in a huge pool around a full-size mock-up of a space station module to copy weightless work in orbit. NASA uses underwater training like this to rehearse every move for spacewalks before a real mission. These drawings show a scold's bridle, a metal head cage used in parts of Britain and Europe from the 1500s onward to punish people, often women, who were judged to talk too much or speak out. On the 14th April 1912, about 2 hours before it hit the iceberg, third-class passengers on the ship Titanic sat behind locked iron gates that kept them away from the lifeboat deck under White Star Line rules. Of 709 third-class passengers, only 174 were later rescued. This rare later-life photograph shows Emperor Ferdinand I of Austria, who ruled from 1835 until he gave up the throne during the 1848 revolution. His striking high forehead came from a lifelong medical condition. In the winter of 1941 to 1942, during the siege of Leningrad, a woman pulls a dead relative to the cemetery on a child's sled, the only transport left in a city without fuel. Over the 872-day blockade, about 632,000 people died mainly from hunger. This photo sequence shows performer Frank "Cannonball" Richards in the 1920s taking his trademark stunt, a 140-pound cannonball fired straight into his stomach. He reportedly repeated this act thousands of times for crowds in fairs and sideshows. In December 1950, at the Chosin Reservoir, this Chinese soldier was found frozen in his firing position in -40-degree cold, his body stiff like a statue. Of about 12,000 Chinese troops, some 1,000 are reported to have frozen to death before combat. On the 6th June 1944, during the Normandy landings, this American soldier with a badly injured face sits in a rocky shelter while a medical officer calmly bandages his hand after reaching the beach in northern France. In the summer of 1931, during the Yangtze River flood, this farm family spent 7 days on their roof without food, while water covered an area about the size of England. Between about 1 and 4 million people lost their lives. Around 28 million were displaced. In 1917, on the Western Front, a German soldier dives for cover as an artillery shell bursts behind him near a field gun. This rare frontline image captures the split-second danger of modern artillery, the main cause of soldier losses in the First World War. In August 1947, during the partition of British India, this Hindu family rides on the roof of a refugee train leaving the New Pakistan, one of about 3,000 people packed onto a train built for around 600. Over the next 3 months, about 15 million people crossed the new borders. On 26 April 1901, Old West train robber Tom Blackjack Ketchum stands on the gallows in Union County, New Mexico Territory, the only person ever legally hanged there. In 1952, during the Korean War, a Korean woman walks through the burned remains of her village, carrying the wrapped body of her son after an air raid with firebombs. During the war, United States forces dropped about 557 tons of napalm. An estimated 2 to 3 million Korean civilians died. In 1959, a priest gives last rites to Cuban Army Corporal Jose Rodriguez as rebel fighters with rifles stand around him moments before his execution. His tribunal by Castro's forces reportedly lasted about 1 minute. On 18 April 1906, after the 7.9 San Francisco earthquake, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore drinks tea on the rubble of her $2 million mansion with a crystal chandelier at her side. The image became a famous symbol of upper-class calm after a disaster that took about 3,000 lives in the city. In 1941 in Belarus, partisans led by Peter Masharov blow up a German army ammunition train. Caught here at the moment, the wagons lift into the air. The group escapes through the forest on bicycles, hiding the film because if the occupiers found this frame, it meant a death sentence. In 1973, photographer Jerry Gay took this image of 4 firefighters resting in the mud after a house fire in Burien, Washington. The picture, titled "Lull in the Battle," won the 1974 Pulitzer Prize for feature photography, and its print sales raised funds for the Northwest Burn Foundation. In 1932, on the Colima Road of Bones, prison camp inmates hack at the frozen ground by hand to build a highway across the permafrost. On some stretches, daily death rates reached an estimated 15%. This section was never finished. In the late 1800s, this long tube-feeding bottle, nicknamed a murder bottle, let babies drink cow's milk, while mothers gave up breastfeeding for tight corsets. The tubes were almost impossible to clean, so bacteria flourished. In 1959, at the Nevada test site, rows of soldiers and observers stood in trench coats and dark glasses watching a nuclear explosion rise over the desert. Many later reported serious health problems linked to the fallout, and photos like this stayed hidden for about 40 years. In the 1920s, British archaeologist Leonard Woolley uncovered these deep brick-lined shafts and clay pipes in the ancient Sumerian city of Ur in present-day Iraq. The find showed that around 4,000 years ago, the city already had advanced drainage. In 1943, in the Warsaw Ghetto, a starving woman trades her cut hair to a German buyer for a single loaf of bread. The hair was used as insulation material in submarine factories. Food rations for Jews were deliberately set at about 184 calories a day, compared with around 2310 for Germans. In 1925 in the United States, this prisoner sits strapped into an electric chair, a method of capital punishment first used in 1890. By the mid-20th century, thousands of executions in many U.S. states were carried out in similar wooden chairs powered by high-voltage current. In 1921 to 1922, during the Volga famine, this Russian family sells its last possessions, including church icons and grandfather's furniture, to traders just to get a little flour. The hunger killed about 5 million people in the region. In 1905, in German-ruled Tanganyika, these women stand in chains with heavy wooden blocks locked to their ankles as prisoners in a colonial penal camp. Such convicts were used as forced labor on roads, plantations, and other imperial projects in East Africa. On Black Thursday, 24 October 1929, New York broker William Craden stands on a 15th floor ledge after losing about $5 million of his client's money in one day. In the days after the crash, several bankers and investors died under similar pressure. In 1966, Oklahoma prisoner James D. French, already serving a life sentence for murder, attacked his cellmate so he would receive the electric chair. Just before the current was switched on, he reportedly told reporters, "How about this for a headline for tomorrow's paper? French fries." In 1937 in Moscow during the Great Terror, a woman stands in line at Lubyanka, holding her husband's photo and asking secret police officers about him, not knowing he was shot 3 days earlier. In 1937 to 1938, about 681,692 people were executed and around 1.5 million sent to labor camps. In Sagada in the Philippines, members of the Igorot people carve their own wooden coffins and after death have them hung high on a limestone cliff beside their relatives. Some of these hanging coffins are centuries old, each one different because it was made by the person who now rests inside it. In October 1956 in Budapest, 16-year-old student Laszlo Nagy faces a 36-ton Soviet tank with a bottle of burning fuel during the Hungarian uprising. In 13 days, the USSR sent about 2,500 tanks and 75,000 troops. Around 2,500 Hungarians and 700 Soviet soldiers died. In 1919 in Boston, a tank holding about 2.3 million gallons of molasses burst, sending a 7-meter-high wave through the streets at roughly 35 miles per hour. 21 people died, around 150 were injured, and parts of the city reportedly smelled like molasses for decades. In autumn 1888 in London's Whitechapel, a street woman hides in a foggy alley while an unknown killer, later called Jack the Ripper, is stalking this district, where 5 women of her trade die in 10 weeks. Scotland Yard questions about 2,000 people and checks some 300 suspects. In 1916, near Ilukste on the Eastern Front, Russian soldiers stand in the trenches, preparing large chlorine cylinders for release toward German lines. Chemical shells and cloud attacks like this were a regular part of First World War fighting after both sides adopted poison gas in 1915. In October 1917 in Petrograd, during the storming of the Winter Palace, sailors of the new regime stripped Countess Sofia Panina of jewels worth about 2 million gold rubles, turning one of Russia's richest women into a captive. In early 1945 on Luzon, American tankers listened to Bernard Herzog, a U.S. civilian just freed from the Santo Tomas internment camp in Manila. After more than 3 years of captivity under Japanese rule, he stands severely underweight. In November 1923 in Germany, at the peak of Weimar hyperinflation, this woman burns stacks of banknotes in her stove because they are cheaper than buying fuel. At this time, one United States dollar was about 4.2 trillion marks. In spring 1945, soldiers of the United States Ninth Army collapse asleep on a German sidewalk the moment their advance toward Berlin pauses. After weeks of marching and combat across Western Germany, many were so exhausted they lay down still wearing helmets and holding rifles. In 1930, New York, former stockbroker James Wilson, ruined by the 1929 crash after losing $500,000, stands on a street corner selling apples for 5 cents. During the Great Depression, unemployment in the United States reached about 25%. In 1991, on the set of Alien 3, Sigourney Weaver smiles inches from the full-size xenomorph prop, her head shaved for the role of Ripley in a prison colony. This behind-the-scenes photo shows that the monster was actually a huge rubber and metal suit operated by people, not a computer effect. In 1905 to 1906 in the Russian Empire, 82-year-old Jewish shopkeeper Mordecai Levin kneels in front of his looted family store while police and Cossacks stand by under orders not to intervene. Over 2 years, there were about 690 pogroms in 102 towns, leaving 3,103 Jews dead. In 1925, the Charlie Berger gang poses with rifles and Thompson guns on their homemade armored truck during the Prohibition liquor wars in southern Illinois. Their leader, Charlie Berger, was arrested soon after, and in 1928 became the last man publicly hanged in the state of Illinois. On 25 December 1914, on the Western Front, British Captain Robert Hamilton and German Lieutenant Kurt Zamisch shake hands and swap cigarettes in no man's land during the Christmas truce. That day, around 100,000 soldiers along much of the line stopped firing, played football. In 1925, actor Lon Chaney shows the same makeup kit he used to build his extreme transformations, earning him the nickname the Man of 1,000 Faces. With this box of wires, putty, false teeth, and painted latex, he turned himself into the disfigured Phantom of the Opera without any help from studio artists. On the 4th of June 1913 at the Epsom Derby, British suffragette Emily Davison stepped into the path of King George V's racehorse in front of about 500,000 spectators and was fatally injured, dying 4 days later. Her funeral drew around 6,000 women marchers. Around the early 1920s, Marie Curie works in her Paris laboratory with her daughter Irene, studying radioactive elements with simple hand-built instruments. Marie would win 2 Nobel Prizes in physics and chemistry. In July 1932 in Washington, police and Army units under General Douglas MacArthur cleared the bonus Army camp of 43,000 First World War veterans and their families who were demanding early payment of promised bonuses. About 10,000 tents were burned. In winter 1999, during the Second Chechen War, Russian soldiers sit in a hillside position overlooking Grozny, and one of them wears an old Second World War German helmet. The battle for Grozny in 1999-2000 became one of the largest urban assaults in Europe since 1945. On the 6th June 1944, at Omaha Beach, Normandy, medics drag a wounded soldier of the United States 116th Infantry Regiment from the surf while German machine guns hit about 90% of the first assault wave in the first 30 minutes. On the 1st March 1932, kidnappers climbed this ladder to Charles Lindbergh's nursery window in Hopewell, New Jersey, snatching his 20-month-old son and setting off what newspapers called the crime of the century. Despite ransom payments totaling $50,000, the boy was later found dead nearby. Summer 1900, during the Boxer Rebellion, German missionaries and Chinese converts are trapped in a mission house as Yihetuan fighters surround them, accusing them of helping foreign influence. In just a few months, about 32,000 Chinese Christians and 200 foreign missionaries died. In 1930, at the start of the Great Depression in the United States, unemployed men marched with signs like cook, porter, painter, and fireman, offering a full day of work for $1. Their homemade hats and job labels turned the street into an open-air resume wall. June 1954, Guatemala. A Maya farm worker kneels in a banana plantation as government troops surround him, accused of communism simply for supporting land reform. A covert United States-backed operation soon removed elected President Jacobo Arbenz. 1921, Jersey City. More than 80,000 fans pack an octagon stadium, all focused on the tiny white square in the middle, where Jack Dempsey meets Georges Carpentier. Their heavyweight title fight becomes the first million-dollar gate in sports history. October 1918, an overworked nurse walks through a makeshift influenza ward in Philadelphia, where some hospitals had only one nurse for dozens of patients and cots lined every hallway. The so-called Spanish flu would circle the globe in just 18 months. In 1863, 12-year-old John Clem marched into battle as the drummer boy of Chickamauga and was promoted to sergeant, the youngest non-commissioned officer in United States history. In 1909 New York, immigrant teenage girls sit in silence at sewing machines, working 14-hour days for $6 a week in a locked Lower East Side factory. 2 years later, one of these crowded workshops, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, would catch fire, and the loss of 146 workers would finally force the city to change its safety and labor laws. In the early 1950s, this photographer leans into the open doorway of a test aircraft, holding a massive motion picture camera to record an upcoming atomic trial over the Marshall Islands. His footage let scientists study the fireball frame by frame. February 1998, sailors sit in lifeboats watching the American warship Mainlist and smoke in Havana Harbor just hours after a sudden explosion tore through the ship. The loss became a rallying cry in the United States, helping trigger the Spanish-American conflict. Early 1950s, Marshall Islands, a United States test device, erupts from the ocean in a gigantic cloud that dwarfs the normal sky around it. From 1946 to 1958, the United States carried out more than 60 major tests at Bikini and Eniwetok atolls. September 1931, Manchuria. Japanese troops search a Chinese mother and child soon after the staged Mukden Railway incident used as a pretext for invasion. The occupation will create the puppet state of Manchukuo, unleash the notorious Unit 731 program. In the late 1970s, the United States poured this huge concrete dome on Runit Island to seal debris and soil from Cold War atomic tests in the Marshall Islands. Today, scientists warn that storms and rising seas are cracking the structure. 14th of April, 1865, Ford's Theater in Washington. President Abraham Lincoln is carried out after a fatal shooting by actor John Wilkes Booth during the comedy Our American Cousin. Lincoln will pass away 9 hours later. 16-year-old Judy Garland reads a Life magazine backstage while the Munchkin actors relax on the MGM lot during filming of The Wizard of Oz in 1938. More than 100 little performers were hired as Munchkins. During United States Prohibition from 1920 to 1933, agents smash open illegal beer barrels while the bar owner kneels and watches his stock pour into the street. In these years, unsafe bootleg liquor poisoned thousands and powered huge criminal profits. In March 1966, astronauts Neil Armstrong and David Scott sit in their Gemini 8 capsule on flotation bags after an emergency splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. Just hours earlier, they had completed the first docking of 2 spacecraft in orbit. April 1915, Ottoman soldiers stand over an Armenian family from Van, who have 2 hours to load their life onto a cart before forced deportation into the Syrian desert. Between 1915 and 1917, around 1 to 1.5 million Armenians died during these deportations. Early 1960s, 17-year-old Nancy D'Alessandro poses with President John Fitzgerald Kennedy at a Washington event, already moving in the political world her father had introduced her to. The teenager in the evening dress will later become Nancy Pelosi. July 17, 1918, Yekaterinburg. Former Emperor Nicholas II stands with his wife Alexandra and their 5 children under guard in the Ipatiev house, days before their secret execution by Bolshevik security forces. During World War I, hospital volunteers and Red Cross workers routinely handed wounded soldiers cigarette packs as a standard comfort item. Tobacco was seen as so important for morale that armies bought millions of cigarettes a day and listed them in rations alongside food. On 27 August 1883, Krakatoa exploded with the loudest sound ever recorded, heard nearly 5,000 kilometers away and strong enough to push ships onto the land. A 40-meter-high sea wave and falling ash ended tens of thousands of lives. 1960, and Cuban leader Fidel Castro steps onto the mound during an exhibition game in Havana, showing off the fastball he once dreamed would take him to the major leagues. Before politics, he played varsity ball and was scouted as a pitcher, helping turn baseball into a key piece of Cuban national identity. July 1, 1916, British troops crowd the trench on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, seconds before going over the top into German machine gun fire. By nightfall, more than 19,000 British soldiers did not return. Over 38,000 were wounded. Soviet women pilots of the Night Witches Regiment posed by their Po-2 biplane, from which they flew low, slow night attack missions against German positions in World War II. Flying up to 8 missions a night with engines cut to glide in near silence, they completed more than 23,000 sorties. Homestead, Pennsylvania, July 2, 1892. Nearly 4,000 Carnegie steelworkers clash with 300 Pinkerton guards sent in on barges. A 12-hour fight that leaves at least 10 people dead and around 60 injured. 17-year-old Julian Kupski was the only survivor of a 1971 plane crash over the Peruvian rainforest after falling several kilometers still strapped into her seat. Injured and alone, she followed a jungle stream for 10 days, living on a few candies until loggers finally found her and brought her to safety. On the 12th of March 1928, the 56-meter-high St. Francis Dam in California suddenly collapsed, releasing 46 million cubic meters of water that rushed 86 kilometers to the Pacific Ocean and swept away entire communities in the middle of the night. Around 600 people lost their lives. A staged publicity shot from the late 1960s shows a model posing with a trained chimpanzee tugging at her skirt, a cheeky setup often used then to sell magazines and promote zoos or circuses. Today, the photo feels more unsettling than funny, a reminder of how past advertising. December 30th, 1903, Chicago, the absolutely fireproof Iroquois Theater, caught fire during a packed holiday show, and 602 people, many of them children, lost their lives in just 15 minutes. Locked exit doors and flammable stage decorations turned the building into a trap. In 1826, Joseph Nicephore Niepce created the first permanent photograph in history, a grainy rooftop view called View from the Window at Le Gras that required about 8 hours of exposure. Modern AI restoration turns that ghostly blur into a clear. From 1918 to 1940, Robert Wadlow was the tallest recorded man in history, reaching 272 centimeters in height, wearing size 74 shoes and needing heavy leg braces as his body never stopped growing. He ate about 8,000 calories a day and died at 22 from an infection caused by his brace. On the 17th of June 1911, Indian suffragettes in saris marched through London with an India banner during King George V's coronation events, demanding the vote for women in both Britain and the colonies. Their protest linked the fight for women's rights with the growing movement against imperial rule. From the 1920s to the 1950s, human cannonball acts launched performers up to 60 meters at about 90 kilometers per hour, with forces near 9G. Only about 50 people ever did this job, and roughly 30 of them lost their lives when the landing net was even slightly miscalculated. At the 1962 Grand Motor Show in Uruguay, Volkswagen stacked Beetles on a steel tower like a giant showroom billboard to prove how light and sturdy the cars were. The dramatic display turned the compact Beetle into a global-style icon years before it became a pop culture classic. Winter 1925, Michigan. Rum runners quietly load Canadian liquor by truck along the frozen whiskey roads that fed America during Prohibition. Smugglers knew that roughly 1 in 3 barrels was counterfeit, cut with industrial methanol that could leave unlucky customers blind or in the hospital. Around 1870, Canadian performer Anna Swan, the Nova Scotia giantess, stood nearly 2 meters 40 tall and was exhibited as the tallest woman in the world. Beside her is fellow show star the Lilliputian King, a stark height contrast that 19th century circuses used to draw massive crowds. 1911, Georgia. Black community leaders meet in a hidden shed, planning armed patrols to protect their neighborhoods from night riders and harassment. Any photo of such a gathering was kept secret for decades because discovery could mean losing jobs, homes, or even their lives. In 1901, a group of British workers notices an early film camera, and one cheeky young man flashes a reversed V sign to the lens. It is the earliest known footage of this hand gesture used as a street insult, showing that people were clowning for the camera from the very birth of cinema. Siberia, 1886. A chain gang has slipped its irons in the snow and started a desperate escape through waist-deep drifts. After 3 days with no food or shoes, stalked by wolves and Cossack patrols, many will freeze on the trail while the few survivors are hunted down. Berlin, May 1945. Soviet Corporal Maria Shalneva calmly directs Red Army traffic through streets still in ruins from the final battle. Behind her stands a fresh, "Long Live May 1st" sign, symbolizing how victory parades are already being planned amid the wreckage. Madrid, 1936. An underground all-women print shop works by a single bulb, turning out illegal leaflets for the Spanish Civil War resistance. Rifles stacked by the wall remind them that if the police find this seller, the printers will be treated as fighters, not workers. 1950s, Ankara, Turkey's third president Celal Bayar, a veteran of the War of Independence, takes a seat on the new Kaman K-225, the country's first helicopter. The strange open-frame machine became a flying symbol of Turkey's rapid push into modern aviation and Cold War-era technology. 1939, Paris. Masked anarchist activists climb a slick rooftop to raise their flag above a guarded government building. Within minutes, police and gendarmes are sweeping the streets and rooftops, but the photo freezes the brief instant when their symbol flies over the city. July 1944. The first echelon of the Brazilian Expeditionary Force lines up to board the USS General W.A. Mann, leaving South America for the war in Europe. Brazil would send about 25,000 soldiers to fight in the Italian campaign. 1945, Austrian salt mine. Soviet officers open a hidden vault packed with Nazi gold bars, jewels, and artwork stacked on rough stone tables. Much of this treasure had been taken from occupied Europe and missing Jewish families. July 1944, Moscow, around 57,000 captured German soldiers stand packed together before being marched through the city in what was called the Parade of the Defeated. After this silent column passed, Soviet crews famously washed the streets, as if wiping away the last trace of the invading army. 1921, Baku oil fields. Workers hold torches and portraits of colleagues killed in clashes over pay and control of the booming oil wells. The photo was reportedly sent to Moscow as proof of the unrest, and many of the organizers were later arrested and never heard from again. January 1945, Italy. British anti-aircraft gunners on the Italian front pause from manning their 40mm Bofors gun to build a towering snowman beside the position. Even this close to the end of the Second World War, they still carve out a moment of rough humor. 1945, Iwo Jima. U.S. Marines climb through the wreckage of a Japanese Mitsubishi G4M bomber on one of the island's captured airfields, studying every hole and twisted frame. The ruined aircraft becomes a field classroom, helping them learn the bomber's weak points for future battles in the Pacific. March 3, 1945, the shattered hull of the Japanese transport ship Kyushu Maru lay stranded on a calm beach of Guadalcanal, framed by palm trees like a piece of giant driftwood. Just 3 years earlier, these same waters were among the fiercest battlegrounds of the Pacific War. April 27, 1918, 2 U.S. Army cooks lean from the windows of Hospital Train number 54 in Horoville, France, taking a brief pause between meals for hundreds of wounded soldiers on board. Many black servicemen were assigned to kitchen and support units like this one. August 17, 1859, crowds in Lafayette, Indiana, watch aeronaut John Wise lift off in a gas balloon carrying the first official airmail in United States history. He was supposed to fly all the way to New York, but shifting winds forced him to land in a cornfield near Crawfordsville with just 30 miles covered. 6 April 1945, U.S. infantry pushed through dense woods near Siegen, Germany, moving to strike a German-held barracks in the final weeks of the war in Europe. Many of these soldiers had been fighting since Normandy, knowing that every silent forest like this could hide one last ambush before victory. March 4, 1943, Finnish combat engineers test a captured Soviet Rock S-2 flamethrower in the snowy forests of Karelia, its tanks disguised to look like an ordinary rifle pack. This Soviet design was meant to fool observers until the moment it sent a sheet of fire across trenches and bunkers. Between 1911 and 1912, workers in Amsterdam raised the Hirsch and Co. fashion house on Leidseplein, turning this forest of wooden scaffolding into one of the city's grandest luxury stores. May 5, 1951, a Marine from the U.S. 1st Marine Division uses a flamethrower to clear a Korean hillside of bunkers and hiding spots. These weapons could project a stream of burning fuel over 40 meters, making them one of the most feared tools of mid-20th century combat. July 1942, Langley Field, Virginia. Ground crew swarm over a Douglas A-20 Havoc, checking its twin engines and nose guns before another low-level attack mission. These fast bombers would soon be flying with U.S., British, and Soviet air forces, hitting trains, convoys. September 1944, British troops capture the giant port of Antwerp, the biggest logistical prize in Western Europe. Yet for 2 more costly months, the docks sit almost useless, while German guns holding the Scheldt estuary choke off Allied supplies just as the push into Germany begins. September 10, 1944. U.S. troops enter Aachen, stepping onto German soil as some of the first Allied soldiers to cross the border. Weeks later, this ruined city will become the first major German city captured by the Allies after brutal street fighting. 1903, Innisfail, Australia. Townspeople haul a huge saltwater crocodile through the street on a rail trolley after catching it in the Johnstone River right by town. In an era before modern wildlife rules, sharing your waterfront with 6-meter apex predators was just part of life in the tropics. November 1943, Battle of Tarawa. U.S. Coast Guardsman ferry supplies passed a wrecked LCM-3 landing craft. Its bow, the only part still showing after a direct hit, sent it to the bottom of the lagoon. On this tiny Pacific atoll, the fight for a single airstrip cost thousands of lives. In January 1945, these soldiers of the United States 82nd Airborne Division trudged through deep snow near Harrisbach, Belgium, still wearing winter camouflage from the Battle of the Bulge. Every step forward in this silent forest meant moving closer to Germany. On August 31, 1886, Charleston in South Carolina was shaken by a magnitude 7 earthquake that tore open buildings like this one and cracked streets across the city. The shock was felt from Cuba to New York, and the famous earthquake bolts still visible in Charleston houses today were added afterward to hold damaged walls together. Mobile dental brigades near Moscow in 1933 turned village rooms into clinics, bringing many people their first modern dental care. The dentist works with a portable pedal-driven drill and air hose, so the station can operate far from electricity or a fixed office. August 1986, a worker stands in front of the shattered Chernobyl reactor, where engineers and soldiers are racing to seal the ruined core under the first concrete sarcophagus. The badges on his chest track invisible contamination that will make this one of the most studied industrial accidents in history. Rare 1913 photo of Helen Keller with her eyes open, already a world-famous writer and speaker, despite losing her sight and hearing as a child. By this time, she had graduated from Radcliffe College and was traveling the world, proving that disability did not limit intelligence or ambition. August 1985, Brazil. Thousands of gold seekers, nicknamed ants, climb the sheer red walls of Serra Pelada with nothing but ladders, buckets, and bare hands. At its peak, almost 50,000 men worked this open pit, hoping one scoop of muddy earth would turn them from farm workers into overnight millionaires. September 1921, Dublin. Civil servant Frank Duff starts a small prayer and service group that will grow into the Legion of Mary, now the largest lay organization in the Catholic Church. From visiting the poor in Irish slums, his idea quietly spread across the world. September 7, 1945, Allied tanks roll down Berlin's main avenue in the Victory Parade, just 4 months after the city was in ruins from constant fighting. American, British, Soviet, and French troops march side by side, a brief moment of unity before the Cold War turns them into rivals. August 5, 1948, soldiers of the 1st Battalion, Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, file off their ship in Singapore, arriving just as the long Malayan emergency is beginning. Many of these men had only just left the battlefields of World War II. August 17, 1944, a huge blast rips through an ammunition storage site in Cherbourg Harbor, sending a perfect mushroom cloud rising over the water. For nearby sailors, it was a stark reminder that even after the port was taken, one stray spark could turn captured stockpiles into their own sudden storm. March 1945, Germany. A Volkssturm militiaman trains a civilian to fire a Panzerfaust, one-shot anti-armor launcher that infantry could learn in minutes. The little tube punched through roughly 200 millimeters of steel at 30-60 meters, a sign of how desperate and improvised the final defenses had become. August 3, 1769, the Portola expedition noted the sticky asphalt pools of La Brea, a place the Tongva people had long used for sealing canoes and baskets. The slow seeps later yielded millions of Ice Age fossils, mammoths, dire wolves. Winter War, 1939 to 1940. Families from Finnish Karelia pack onto horse-drawn sledges in -30-degree cold, part of an evacuation that moved about 400,000 people in weeks. Many never returned after peace ceded their towns to the Soviet Union. Amelia Earhart supervises fuel drums for her Lockheed Electra 10E NR-1620 in 1937, double-checking the load before the next leg of her round-the-world attempt. The Electra was modified with twin 600-horsepower Wasps and 24 tanks holding about 100 gallons to chase a 29,000-mile route. Christmas 1916. British soldiers share a holiday meal in a shell crater beside a wooden cross, still in Brodie helmets and mud-soaked greatcoats on the Somme front. The menu was trench staples, Makanoki stew, bully beef, hard biscuits. Arctic 1943. The Northern Fleet's mascot bear Masha rides the ice-strewn Barents Sea as escort ships plow the convoy route to Murmansk. Sailors across the fleet adopted animal mascots, from dogs to rescued bear cubs, to lift morale during -30 watches. Iran 1967. A village apprentice ties Persian knots on a vertical loom, building a pattern from memory while elders call out the sequence. Fine rugs often reach 300 to 600 knots per square inch, using wool dyed with madder, indigo, and pomegranate. Vietnam 1967. An M48A3 Patton commander presses his eye to the stereoscopic rangefinder, steering a 90mm gun and roof-mounted .50 from a turret lit by red lamps. Diesel-converted Pattons served as rolling forts for road security and convoy escort. Tehran, 1967. Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and Farah Diba, with their children, Crown Prince Reza and Princess Faranaz, after the coronation at Golestan Palace. Farah became the first crowned empress of Iran in modern times, wearing a 2-kilogram emerald. In 1967, Bank of America hit the road with a full mobile branch, a trailer with a floor-bolted safe, 3 tellers, and a highway-sized sign. These rolling banks faded as ATMs, phone banking, and tighter security rules made wheels a costly extra next to cards and apps. June 7, 1967. Israeli paratroopers reached the Western Wall for the first time in 19 years, minutes after the Old City is secured. "The Temple Mount is in our hands," crackles over the radio, and the soldiers stand quietly before the ancient stones. Harlem, 1967. Children watch from a window on East 100th Street as a rubble-strewn alley runs between iron fire escapes. This image is from Bruce Davidson's 2-year project on this block, made with Residents' Trust and home visits. Nancy Wake, the White Mouse, parachuted into occupied France as an SOE agent, organizing Maquis units and sabotaging rail lines and supply routes. She once cycled 500 kilometers in 72 hours to restore a lost radio link. With a 5 million franc bounty on her head. Newlyweds, Archduke Maximilian of Austria and Princess Charlotte of Belgium in 1857. 7 years later, they sailed to Mexico as Emperor Maximilian and Empress Carlotta, set up court at Chapultepec, and even adopted Iturbide's grandsons as heirs. September 1955, Cordoba Aviation School. Civilians and sympathetic officers pose after taking the base in the first hours of the uprising against Juan Perón. Their move, part of the Revolución Libertadora, led in Cordoba by General Eduardo Lunardi, helped swing the revolt that sent Perón into exile. 1886, Sydney. 6 of the young men in the notorious Mount Rennie case pose for police portraits after a 16-year-old servant was seized and attacked by a roaming crowd of larrikins. Of about 20 accused, only 10 were convicted. 1942, El Alamein, an Australian gunner, hugs 25-pounder shells as the 9th Division's stubborn stand, and night raids pinned Rommel long enough for Montgomery's breakout. By holding the desert line after Tobruk and guarding the supply routes, the Aussies kept Egypt, the Nile. September 1955, Cordoba. Volunteers and soldiers aim from a window across the old Cabildo as the liberating revolution turns the city into the uprising's fiercest street front. With Mauser rifles and Halcon submachine guns, these groups helped force Perón from power within days. 1937, Berghof. Adolf Hitler tries his hand at Kegel, 9-pin bowling, in the basement alley built for off-duty evenings with his inner circle. This rare leisure snapshot shows how the ruling elite mixed casual games with state business on the Obersalzbergs. 1942, at the Wolf's Lair near Rastenburg. A staged visit shows him kissing a child, part of a careful image campaign meant to look gentle for home front audiences. Outside that calm room, the forest base stretched for miles with bunkers, blast walls, camouflage nets. 1912, New York. Louis Gregory, an American Baha'i lawyer, and Louisa Matthew, an English Baha'i, married when many U.S. states still banned such unions. For decades they traveled together giving talks on unity and equality, quietly defying hotels, halls, and customs that tried to keep them apart. In 1944, 16-year-old Jack Warner Hill became the Marine who drew enlisted service number $1,000, proof of the Corps' massive World War II intake. The million card was photographed and archived, turning an ordinary recruit into a tiny but unforgettable record-keeping milestone. Hours after RMS Lusitania went down in just 18 minutes, her name still glows on lifeboats hauled ashore at Queenstown, silent proof of how fast an ocean giant can vanish. The U-20's single strike cost 1,198 lives and jolted world opinion, nudging a neutral America toward war 2 years later. Sato newlyweds pose in Verska, 1912. The bride wears a shining breastplate of silver coins and brooches, a dowry on her chest that served as both protection and savings. Women crowd the window as Sato songs bless the pair, and every coin rings like a tiny bell of good fortune. Rome, December 10, 1944. U.S. Private Werner Schmiedel of Pennsylvania faces the stockade camera after leading the outlaw Lane Gang of American and Canadian deserters in wartime Italy. They posed as MPs, hijacked supply trucks, and lived off black market cash until Allied investigators closed in. Dorothea Lange caught this battered car in April 1935, crammed with children, bedding, and fuel cans as a family inched toward California in search of work. From 1930 to 1940, about 2.5 million people left the Dust Bowl and Southwest, riding Route 66 to orchards and picking camps that often paid only pennies. Moscow, 1936, a carefully publicized moment, Stalin cradling 10-year-old Svetlana to project a gentle family image just as the state tightened the screws at home. 3 decades later, she stunned the world by defecting to the United States under the name Lana Peters. August 15, 1945, neighbors bow as Hirohito's voice, heard by the public for the first time, crackles through the famous Gyokuwan Hoso recording. Cut the night before to foil a coup attempt, his formal words about accepting the Potsdam Declaration signaled the end of the Pacific War and the start of a new chapter for Japan. In February 1918 at Delville Wood, a South African soldier's sister kneels by his rough wooden cross amid a forest of splintered stumps. 2 years after he fell, the ground still looks like the moon. In the 1916 fight, the South African brigade lost about 4/5 of its men. Fewer than 800 of roughly 3,100 walked out. August 8, 1945. A reconnaissance photo of central Hiroshima shows streets but almost no houses. Only a handful of reinforced buildings near the bend by the Aioi Bridge still cast shadows. Within about 2 kilometers of the blast center, wooden districts were flattened by shock and fire, leaving this map-like grid of empty blocks. Under a sunshade, an artist calmly paints the ruined face of San Francisco's City Hall after the earthquake of April 18, 1906. The shock, estimated at magnitude 7.8, and fires that burned for 3 days erased about 80% of the city, turning the rubble into a quiet open-air studio of renewal. Bucharest, December 22, 1989. Protesters ride an army tank past a burning building, waving the Romanian tricolor with the center cut out. That hole, where the state emblem once sat, became the revolution's mark as the army switched sides and the leader fled by helicopter. A machinist bores the face of a space shuttle main engine injector in 1977, a disc packed with hundreds of tiny channels that must line up within a few micrometers. Those holes blend liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen to feed a chamber near 3,000 pounds per square inch. On Christmas Day, 1942, a Papuan guide from the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels leads a wounded Australian along the Kokoda Track, barefoot through mud, leeches, and steep jungle ridges. These volunteer carriers hauled supplies and helped the hurt for weeks at a time, and veterans credit them with saving thousands of lives in the New Guinea campaign. Ukraine, 1943. A wide street faces open ruins from the hard 1941 fighting, while rows of Czech hedgehogs guard the empty road. Made from crossed steel rails, these X-shaped obstacles could jam a tank's tracks and keep working with no power, no crews, and even under fire. A United States Army military policeman posts the first exclusion notice on Bainbridge Island in March 1942, ordering local families of Japanese ancestry to report for removal under Executive Order 9066. Over 100,000 people were then sent to remote camps across the West, a decision later acknowledged as unjust and apologized for by the government. Warsaw, 1941. A woman lies on the pavement inside the sealed ghetto, where about 400,000 people were packed into less than 4 square kilometers. Official rations fell to roughly 100 or 200 calories a day, so children slipped through holes in sewers to smuggle bread in a quiet fight to stay alive. To make throwing feel natural, the United States tested hand grenades that matched a baseball's size and weight, so new soldiers could use the same motion they learned as kids. This odd test piece, a leather football with a fin, was part of that trial path. East Timor, December 12, 1942. Australian soldiers burned the village of Mindelo near Turiscai before withdrawing to deny shelter and supplies to Japanese forces. It was a hard scorched earth tactic in the long Battle of Timor, where small Sparrow Force patrols with Timorese helpers kept fighting for months behind the lines. A German Army NCO sprints after a farm chicken with 2 bayonets, a slapstick snapshot of life far from the front line. In many campaigns, rations ran thin and troops foraged livestock to stretch supplies, turning scenes like this into a rough field kitchen tactic. June 1941 in Lithuania. Women pass buckets of water to German columns at the opening rush of Operation Barbarossa. Some locals briefly hoped the newcomers would end a year of Soviet rule, but the road soon led to seizures, crackdowns, and a hard occupation.